It's 7 o'clock, and it's time to begin the November 4th, 2019 Radnor Township Planning Commission meeting. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. The next piece of business is the review of the minutes of the September 3rd meeting. Does anybody have any corrections, changes, additions to the minutes? Let the record reflect that the September 3rd minutes have been approved. Next on the agenda is the planning module for Meadowbrook Road. There's also the fourth item on the agenda is another planning module for 415 Maplewood Drive. Now, I understand I can just sign these?
Yes, Commissioner. So Mr. President, they are perfunctory in nature. So they're required to do this. All's been checked out by our reviewing firm. Correct. All you really need to do is sign it. There's really not much in the way of discussion for either of them.
Okay. Just does anybody have any questions or discussion? Okay. At the conclusion of the meeting, I'll sign them and give them over to you.
Thank you very much.
Next on the agenda is item number 5, which is 145 Conestoga Road zoning hearing application. Who's here on behalf of 145 Conestoga Road? Oh, is that do we have a typo? Is it 147 or 145?
It's 147.
Okay.
Evening. Nick Canilia, representing the applicant, Colin Whalen.
Evening.
And just to go over what we have here, this will involve a subdivision. That's why it's before the board. Because it is a land development, then because it does involve a subdivision, is proceeding to the zoning hearing board. There's variances that are being requested, and since it will involve a subdivision, it appears before this board. It's regarding the property, as we mentioned, at 147 Conestoga Road. And you see the property here, and this is actually a twin home. And the other side of the twin, which is a 30 by 150-foot lot, is not part of this. What is being purchased here is this half of the twin and then this large open area that you see here. And actually it's this large open area where we're seeking to construct another twin home that's very similar to everything else along Conestoga Road. This is basically, if you're at the intersection of Conestoga and Lancaster, I know some of the Sixth Ward people obviously know what we're talking about. It's right before Doyle. Yeah, so here's Doyle Road here, skip. And as you're going up toward Lancaster Avenue. And it's like, the first or second block. I guess South Devon is probably about in this area here. Would be over here, South Devon Avenue. And as I mentioned, here's Doyle and Lenore and Lantoga are further up here. We're heading towards Lancaster Avenue, just to give you some feel for the direction that we're going in. The property is zoned R5 residential. As you're aware, R5 permits twin homes, so the use is permitted, what we're asking for here. We intend to keep the existing twin here, and as I mentioned, build another twin out here. It will be separated. This twin home would have the same dimensions as the twin right next to it, which is 30 by 150. And then on the open area here, the proposal was to build another twin, or in fact, two twins, in this area, meaning one home here, or actually, like side by side, fronting on Conestoga. The issue here, as we'll see as I go through the plans, is the fact that we have two front yards. And when you have two front yards, it severely limits what you can develop and not develop. Just to go through a little bit, as you're
Nick,
coming-
just to be clear, though, it's one structure.
It's one structure.
One structure with a shared party wall, semi-detached.
Yeah. It's one structure with a shared party wall, a semi-detached building. Showing you. Yes, correct. Here's if you're going up toward Lancaster here, here's the other side of the block. And the reason I'm showing this is just to show, the first area there, as you're coming down Lancaster on the same side of the street as the twin, is some commercial development, and then you start running into the twin homes. On the other side of the street are basically twins and some duplexes, all of which have actually, most of them, as you can see here from this map, have a lot width even less than the 30 feet that we're requesting here. And just to show that what we're proposing is very consistent with the rest of the area where it's being proposed.
And if I could just add one note,
You got
the
to
one lot
come
would,
up. Colin, you got to talk.
the one lot would be, I'm sorry, Colin Whalen, I'm the applicant. One lot would be 30 by 150, closer to 147. The other would be wider.
We're going to get into that.
Sorry,
Okay.
sorry. Just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah. So here's the existing, as what is being purchased is this area here. Here's the twin that will remain, and the proposal is to construct the two twins side by side in this area here. Currently, there's a driveway for this twin located in this area. We're proposing to have a driveway here for the one half of the twin and keeping this driveway for the other twin. So actually, we're only doing one additional curb cut as a result of this.
Nick, there's a garage on that corner? Is that garage,
It's a shed.
Oh, it's a shed.
And what you could do?
It would be proposed. It would be removed.
okay.
Sorry, there's something, you got interrupted. There's a shed and a garage? Is that what you just said?
No, the shed's being removed. So there's no garage.
One structure.
So would there be parking for the existing twin?
Yes. The parking for the if you're showing, I'm going to show what's been marked as A8 in the zoning packet at least. So here's the existing twin, and the parking for the existing twin would be a curb cut that comes right here. Correct?
Yeah, I actually have the proposed driveway plan if you'd like to see on the iPad. I don't know how it's going to show up. But I don't know if I can zoom in.
Yeah, it's not, it may not. Okay. And so here's the existing twin, and you see that the driveway would be here. And then for one of the proposed twins, actually I erred, and I did say there are going to be two curb cuts because there's one here and one here. And the proposed one half of the twin, the curb cut would be there, and this curb cut will remain for the other twin. Looking at the plan, as I mentioned, this twin will be on a very similar lot, very similar plot, actually exactly the same 30 by 150 as the twin that is adjacent to it. This twin would have a 30 by 150 lot size. It would need, the request for the variances for this twin is on the lot width because the requirement is 40 feet, even though in this entire area, nothing's 40 feet wide for a twin. And also for lot area because it's 30 times 150.
Nick, speak into the microphone a little.
It's 30 by 150, so it's a little bit shy, 4,500 square feet. It's a little bit shy of the gross gross lot area. The other twin will be side by side located here. This twin also has a 30 by 150-foot lot area similar to the ones right next to it. As we mentioned, the curb cut would be coming in here, and then the twin adjacent to it would actually comply with the lot width and the lot area requirement. But the issue on this one is that since we have two corner lots, it severely restricts the ability to put a twin here, and according to code, we would only have a 5-foot wide building. So we're asking for relief on the front yard setback on this one. So here we have lot width, lot area, again, consistent with the rest of the neighborhood. And here we comply with everything except for the front yard setback along Doyle Road. But it should be noted that also along Doyle Road, there's also numerous nonconformities. And here's Doyle Road here, and you notice how close the homes already are to the house. The issue here is up until the 1960s or 70s, there really was no lot width or lot area requirements in the township, and all these homes were built prior to that time. So we have numerous nonconformities on lot width, lot area, front yard setback, because the code provided much less back when these homes were built than they do today. There's also in the zoning packet an exhibit that actually shows the setbacks along Doyle Road, because that's the road we're asking for the front yard setback with, and it's very consistent with what we're requesting are the existing front yard setbacks on Doyle. So what we're proceeding to the zoning hearing board for, as I mentioned, is lot width, lot area relief for this lot, the existing twin, lot width, lot area for one of the proposed twins, and front yard setback for the other twin.
Have any of the neighbors on Doyle or Conestoga made any comments, or are any of them here?
Colin, I don't. Well, the notices have not gone out yet.
The
So
mailer was picked up today, and they're going to be going out this week.
they will have notices before the zoning hearing, of course. It's required by Radnor ordinance. They don't get notice of this. Whenever there is the neighbors never get notice of this review for a zoning hearing, but they do get notice of the actual zoning hearing.
And just so the commission knows, so if this would get a favorable to the applicant at the zoning hearing board, and they come through land development subdivision, that's when we do our full reviews, and it is back in front of this commission to see that. This is here solely because our ordinance requires all applications before the zoning hearing board to appear before you.
I don't really have a hard time with this. I think it stays pretty conformity what's already there and what's in the neighborhood. And you're basically your hardship is that it is a lot and it's two frontages. So you could almost say Conestoga Road's your frontage, so your side yard is Doyle, but that's not the way the ordinance reads. So
Correct.
I think you're okay as long as you stay consistent with the other twin. I think it's okay.
And what we're doing here is actually maintaining that. If this was a side yard, we're maintaining that side yard setback for corner lots, which in the past, zoning board has given some relief when you had two front yards, as Charlie probably remembers.
But this is a corner lot.
Yes, it is. Yeah, this is a corner lot. Because that way you have two front yards when it's a
I
corner
know, but
lot.
I like all the other houses you're comparing to are not corner lots. So I'm a little puzzled as to why the definition of the corner lot is that it has two front yards.
Right.
So I'm puzzled. You can't use the zoning code as a hardship,
No, that's.
but that's what you're asking.
Well, because you have two front yards, it diminishes your ability to actually construct.
that's
a home,
I know,
even
but
though
that's
you
a
have
corner
enough
lot.
area to do it.
Every corner lot has
Yeah.
that restriction.
But again, if you look, for example, right immediately across the street, there's a twin that actually is too close to Doyle Road, even though it is a corner lot. Now, again, as I said, that home was built prior to this ordinance coming into play, so it's an existing nonconformity.
The experience that you have when you go around that neighborhood is that this addition, this twin that is being offered up here would not in any way, shape, or form make the neighborhood look worse. The lot's that big that they're going to put this twin on compared to what other lots are across the street. I mean, what's really noticeable is there's no sidewalks on Doyle. So that's how tight it is. So, you know, by my measure, this is not aberrant in any way.
I think my only comment is really on the parking, especially since back when these other homes were built, Conestoga Road probably wasn't as congested. It wasn't as dangerous, especially around this intersection. And so I'm wondering whether the existing twin and the twin in between, the parking, is it allowable to have parking on Conestoga Road in front of the structure?
I don't know if it says no parking.
Or is that
No one
another
parks there.
variance?
I've never seen anyone park on Conestoga Road. Yeah, I don't know, Steve, I don't know if it says no parking, but no one ever does it.
No, so we just had a big sewer repair there last year, and that was the one thing we didn't have to worry about was cars parking there. I don't know if it's posted that way. I really don't. I just don't see it. The homes that are there, they park in their drives, probably for fear of their vehicle more than anything else, being on Conestoga Road, but I don't know. We'd have to check to see if that's posted that way.
And in our zoning code, it's acceptable to build a driveway that does not extend to the back of the property in this area? I'm not familiar with the specifics of that part.
Well, I think that one of the reasons why, my
think there's
feeling about it
anything-
is that the choices that we have here as the Planning Commission is, one of the choices is to remain neutral in this, and we can do that. And give the zoning hearing board full latitude to review this thing and decide, because they have that's their role. They're the deciders, the judges of this thing, at least far more than we would be, and leave it at that. Because of some of the issues that have just been raised.
We have developed a sketch, to show, our proposed concept, which
Turn it the other way, yeah.
would kind of mimic what's in the neighborhood.
I do have one quick clarification. When you do your curb cuts in your proposed drawing that you showed for the driveways, is it going to be one curb cut that both of the cars could access, or are you really cutting it twice?
It would be it's proposed as two curb cuts, but I guess we could, explore a shared driveway for the two.
As that came up, I just turned to Colin and asked him, what do you think of the possibility of doing a shared driveway for this to reduce the curb cuts on Conestoga Road?
Well, we could make that part of our recommendation, a neutral with a recommendation that they consider one curb cut and a shared driveway.
I don't like shared driveways. I think that, from my own personal experiences with them, my parents had a shared driveway. If you don't get you don't get along with your driver, and when the ambulance came to pick up my father, they actually parked in the driveway so he couldn't get in. I just, from that day on, I said, shared driveways don't work for me. I don't think that's a good deal.
We recognize those concerns, and that's why we did do the two individual.
Maybe I misunderstood. I thought you had a driveway from Doyle.
For this one here, yes.
Okay, and then there's two on Conestoga,
There are two proposed for
two new ones.
And they both, Colin tells me they conform that we're supposed to be 50 feet from Doyle Road, which they are, from the intersection.
So,
But yeah, it would be two new ones. I had misspoken. I said one new one initially, then I corrected myself and said you know.
So
there's
actually, if you count 145 in terms of looking at the space, there's a driveway for 145 that's on, cuts in already into Conestoga. You're going to add 147, and I guess, let's call it 149. We'll have 2 new curb cuts, and then finally, the 151 will be
Existing,
Doyle.
which would be
And that's an existing curb cut on Doyle? Okay.
correct, it's right here.
And if this goes through, obviously they have to apply for a PennDOT low-volume driveway permit, and PennDOT's going to have their questions and requirements for this also.
That's right. Conestoga Road is a state highway?
That's correct, sir.
Guess I'm really puzzled why we have a zoning code if you can come in and change it. Because it's not convenient to you. I'm a little puzzled by that.
Well, that's why we asked for variances.
Yeah,
There'd be
but
no zoning board
I
if-
know,
yeah.
but the zoning code isn't a variance issue. I mean, you can ask for a variance, but on what basis? Because you want to?
No, because we're not able to use the land in a feasible manner. We
But
basically have
that's a
it-
corner, that's why, that's
lot right
that's the
here
definition of a
that's totally
corner lot.
undeveloped.
That's the
You know, yeah, this
definition
is
of a
totally
corner
undeveloped.
lot.
I understand, that's.
I know,
why
so
we-
everyone with a corner lot will now have the option to not do a front yard?
No, that's not.
That's
as
essentially
you
what you're
know-
saying.
As you know, every zoning case is unique. You know, it's a separate set of facts. You know, if the zoning board grants this relief, it doesn't establish any precedent.
No, I'm just a
for
little
further
puzzled
relief.
as to on what basis you're asking.
Nick?
I think that might be a discussion more appropriately held before the zoning hearing board as to, and that's why the zoning hearing board really has the final say on this, because they make the determination as to whether or not the applicant is satisfied the usual criteria to get a variance. It's case law, other decisions by other courts, the way the place looks right now, and so on. It's a judgment call, but it's really for the zoning hearing board to make that call and to resolve some of the issues that you've raised.
Nick, I had a question. How wide is a driveway that you're looking at here?
10 feet. The existing or the proposed?
The proposed.
10 feet.
So I'm just looking at the map right here. It's page 2. And it looks like where the houses would be sitting, there's 20 feet in between, but I don't know. Maybe there's a little bit more.
Yeah, there's 10 feet here, or actually there's 10 feet here and 10 feet here, so there is 20 feet. Between the two, between this twin, the existing twin, and the proposed twin.
So if you have 10-foot driveways with 20 feet of space, then it's pretty much a shared driveway. Is there enough room to split them?
I'm not,
The total lot would be 30 feet wide, so you're seeing the 10-foot setback
oh,
between,
yeah, and actually it's a little bit more.
Well, that's what I'm
10
wondering.
foot, yeah, it's.
Is there a little bit over there that
There's
you
a
could?
little bit on this side. It looks like there's a couple feet here, because this is just showing the setback here. And this is showing the setback here. I don't know if there's any room on this side proposed, Colin.
yeah, if I could go back to the driveway plan.
Well, the one driveway for property 2 looks like it would go right to the structure.
They're already violating the 40-foot wide requirement.
What's that?
They're already violating the 40-foot wide requirement, so if you move the
No,
lot
no,
line.
I'm just asking, going to the question of a shared driveway. Do they have enough land that they could pull the two apart to make it separate driveways?
I think they don't necessarily have to pull them apart. It's just that they have to each have their own lane. You know what I mean? In other words, it'd be like just, this would be it, but this would be the 10-foot for this side and 10-foot for this side. They don't necessarily have to have a piece of grass down the middle,
Oh.
is what you're looking for, right? Is some kind of differentiation
I
between
mean,
the two?
that to me would make it not a shared driveway. Otherwise, it seems like a shared driveway.
A shared driveway would be one 10-foot wide and they all both use it.
Yeah, but you could
Nick?
get wider after you got in.
Your relief here is that you basically would prefer to build a twin than a single-family home, because in comparison, it's almost closer to by right to build a single-family home on that lot.
Yeah, we looked at building a single-family home, and when you go by right and do 40-foot lot widths for all of them, and then I believe it's an 80-foot lot width for a single, or whatever the lot width is in the single, it's in the code. But the building envelope was what, about 7.5 feet wide, I believe, for the single. So it still really wasn't feasible. You know, again, because of the corner lot, you know, the building envelope, it wasn't feasible to even build a single, even though you had plenty of room and probably double the area that's required for a single.
Any other questions, observations?
I think that's an important piece of information, is the fact that you looked at both, because that, to me, changes my idea of what the hardship it is that you're going for. I think my only other comment would be that I think that the total impervious should be looked at too, not by us, not right now, but just to make sure that as you're going for this, some of this is feasible.
The building area that's shown on the proposed is not what we would actually build. What's on the survey or the sketch that we provided is what the building footprint, I'm sorry, on the plan is 80 feet deep. That's allowed by
Right.
the footprint. We're only proposing 60 foot deep.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it would be 20 by 60. So basically a 1,200 per floor footprint rather than what's shown, 1,600. We just wanted to show what could be per the lot area. But we're not going to.
I'm assuming that you're going to comply with 35% building coverage and 40% impervious coverage.
Correct. The only relief
You're not
we-
asking for any variances or specials for,
No relief on impervious building coverage, anything of that nature, anything, you know, any other zoning requirements, just the zoning requirements that I
right,
went over
there's
this
basically
evening.
four things you're asking for, right? No, four. You got 10-foot side yard, you got two 30-foot widths, right, and one 4,500 square foot width total, right?
We have for this lot, it's the lot width and lot area. For this lot, it's the lot width and lot area. And for this lot is front yard setback.
Okay, but you're also now making lot 1 30-foot.
Yes, so
Right,
from
so-
lot width, lot area for lot 1, lot width, lot area for lot 2,
Right,
front yard setback for lot 3.
right, and 4,500 square feet total for lot 2.
Lot area, lot width,
Right.
yeah. Lot area being, yeah, right. It's like 5,000 something. is the requirement.
5445.
54.
So, Mr. President, if I may ask, so what we do is we will send these minutes in to the zoning hearing board, which will be your recommendation. If after your discussion, we could very clearly and succinctly for Trish, state your comments so she can have them more or less as bullet points, it'll make it a lot easier, and the zoning hearing board, I think, will very clearly understand your concerns or comments. Thank you.
And one comment, because there's a question was asked about the size of the single family, and I have in my notes, it's 13.5 feet. I misspoke, Megan, I said 7.5. It's actually 13.5 feet wide, not 7.5, which is still not practical for a single family.
Any more questions, observations? Otherwise, would someone like to create that list of various recommendations that I've heard here so far, or we've heard here so far?
I mean, I would make a record, but I kind of think, I think it's up to the zoning board to decide whether they want to give them the variances for these things. I personally don't have a hard time, only because it's consistent with what's there. You know, I think that, you know, I always find corner lots kind of crazy to begin with. They really restrict as to what you can do, but that's.
Well,
the corner
I
lot.
don't disagree with you, Charlie. I think that it does seem like a reasonable thing to do. And, you know, what we're looking at here seems like it's okay, but I also think that we have to let the the zoning hearing board do their job.
That's what I said, and I also believe that when it gets to zoning, the neighbors will show up. We don't have any neighbors here. And then we'll
Correct.
really find out what they think of the situation. We don't have that input, so without that input, it kind of makes our recommendations maybe a little bit more difficult, but I'm sure if anyone in the neighborhood has a hard time with it, they're going to show up and say why. But I
Right.
mean, as it stands now, and the only thing that I would probably add to this is that Matt said is maybe require them to put sidewalks on Doyle as, you know, a contingency to get this done, only because it is a difficult place to walk. They do have sidewalks on Conestoga, but they're only in front of the property and not past that point.
Well, this is why I was suggesting that we take a neutral stance, but with our recommendations as part of that. In other words, not approve, disapprove, but these are some of the things that should be considered by the zoning hearing board. The sidewalks on Doyle, for example, that'd be one bullet point. Any others that anybody else has, let's
We have
hear them.
curb cuts,
Limit the curb cuts or just
or just the
question?
quantity and whether they should be shared or it should be two separate. The sidewalk on Doyle, the driveway width, meeting the lot development criteria.
Oh, hang on one sec. So we
Oh,
have
sorry,
sidewalks on Doyle.
Yes.
driveway width,
Well, you said before that there was number of
Question
curb
of-
cuts.
number of curb cuts. The
Driveway.
fourth thing was meeting the lot development criteria, which is what Megan brought up. And the
I
fifth-
apologize, I only have three. and you
Okay,
mentioned
so
four.
I'll just start from the top. Consider the curb cuts, how many? Consider the driveway width, especially if you're going to do a shared curb cut. The sidewalks on Doyle. Number 4 is meeting the lot development criteria, because obviously the drawing is just a placeholder at this point. And the fifth thing was neighbor input to be valued in the review. That's the 5 I have. Anybody else have one?
I have one new one. In terms of a single family, an alternative relief request might be to pick up 7.5 feet or 6.5 feet in terms of your front yard setback on Doyle. Then suddenly you could have a 20-foot wide house instead of 13.5. And it would reduce one of the curb cuts or eliminate. But that would be an alternative. I mean, I'm ambivalent, but I'm not really totally opposed. I haven't had a chance to say that. I live on a corner lot, and I've had to ask for relief, and you know, I guess that gives me a slight bias, but I would look at the alternative because that's hideous traffic sometimes at South Devon and Conestoga.
So do we have that list? Do we have that list down?
I think we have the list down, but just to try and put it all together, everything everybody's saying. So the recommendation that you're suggesting, John, would be that the planning commission reviewed the application and determined it was appropriate to remain neutral on the application. However, if the zoning hearing board is considering granting relief, the planning commission asked that it look carefully at the following items. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think you
Yes,
stated it very well.
said.
Sorry, what was Mr. Kunda's, in a more succinct?
That an alternative ask, so to speak, at zoning would be to continue to ask for that relief on the front yard of the corner lot on Doyle, but instead apply it towards a single-family house, a 20-foot wide single-family house, let's say hypothetically. Because the houses that you do propose that are 1,200, they're both more than 10, right?
Right, yeah.
So you would have had it 40 feet of twin or maybe 20 or 25 feet of single as an alternative. Just,
So I think we need a motion. Would anyone care to make a motion?
you know, John, should we do a straw poll, like, in terms of, do you think the majority of people want to do a neutral recommendation?
I don't know. so let's find out. Who was in favor of doing a neutral recommendation?
Your microphone.
I'm sorry. Let's just get a straw vote as to who is in favor of making a recommendation being neutral, but with if the zoning hearing board decides to approve the application, that they consider the 5 items that we've already enumerated. So that's 1, 2,
Yeah, I mean, that's as
3.
good as any.
4, 5. Matt, where are you?
I would approve this.
Okay,
I would approve it.
okay. Steve, where are you? Okay,
So it's the neutral.
yeah, okay, so let's have, who would like to, Elizabeth, could you make a motion for us, please?
Make a motion to, oh gosh, how do I say this? To remain neutral in the review of 147 Conestoga Road, and that if the Board of Commissioners elects to grant permission.
Zoning hearing board.
If the the zoning hearing board elects to grant permission to consider the 5 points as well as the additional, do you want me to repeat those 5 points? Or are you good on those?
6.
The 5 points, and then the 6th one being the alternate approach with a single-family development. You good with that?
Second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor of the proposed?
Can I amend that? I'm not, I can't, I'm not into the 6th point. I'm not into dictating what people should be looking at.
It's just a
Yeah, I
recommendation.
still, I don't think it's our position to say, look at something else, they need to do that. That's just my opinion, that's just my opinion.
Okay.
Okay, well, we have that on the record, and I'm sure that Nick is going to consider that as much as it should be considered. And so I think we have a second. So can we have a vote on who's in favor of the neutral position with the 5 recommendations that we've made?
What happened to the 6th?
I'm sorry, the 6 recommendations that we've made. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
No.
Okay, so we have
If you
5
put
in,
the 6th in, I'd take my vote off.
okay, so we have 5 in favor. And who is against any who is in favor of approving it? So we have 2 for approving, and 1, I think, is recommending that would recommend that it be denied. Okay.
You're right, I agree with what you're saying.
It seems like the
just don't think it's-
neutral recommendation is carried.
They're smart enough to figure it out themselves.
Not all the time, because
Well,
it
then
gets
the
heated.
zoning board has to be,
Yeah.
give them an alternative.
I don't know if you can count it that way. I think it's, you either vote for it, against it, or you abstain. So seems like it's 5, 2, 3. To count it the other way, you'd need a new motion.
Concurring decision.
This just
5,
got
2,
deep.
3, can't, how do you have 5, 2, 3? We only have 8 of us.
I would just recommend that the minutes reflect the reasons that the dissenters dissented, so that it's clear to the Planning Commission that 2 of the no votes were because they were recommending a straight approval, and 1 of the no votes was recommending a straight denial. So that gives them a little bit more information.
That's correct, and then the minutes will reflect Skip's suggestion that as an alternative, I don't know how that would be done procedurally, but an alternative might be a single-family, consideration of a single-family building. So, thank you.
John? What 5 approved? Because I'm going to need the names.
5 were sidewalks on Braille.
No, she
No,
means.
the five voters.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, the five who voted for it, please. For neutral. Yeah.
I actually thought that Matt was no, Matt, I thought that Skip, I thought I had Matt as a no. That's okay.
Yeah, maybe we didn't.
He's saying he's a neutral.
Yeah, I guess we have to go back. Because Charlie yanked his,
2 and 2, right?
He said 5, 3, and 2, that's very many people, we don't go 8 of us.
All right.
no, it's 5 and 3, actually, so. But I think when you withdrew your vote, then it obviously changed. So we don't, it went from, it's a tie vote now, 4 and 4. Okay.
Oh, we still, I'm sorry, we still don't know which ones voted against.
Well, I'm not sure we actually had a proper vote for taking the neutral position with the 5 recommendations. I think that was actually voted, that's now 4 and 4, because Charlie withdrew his approval. So if we go back to frankly, I think what we ought to do is go back to the 5, knock out the single family, because I think Charlie's got a point that, I mean, you're represented by council. He certainly knows what to do, and that's certainly considered single family. The zoning hearing board is not in a position to say to Nick, by the way, if this doesn't work out, you should do single family. I mean, he can do that himself. I don't think he needs us to tell him that.
Would you like me to say it over again? Without number 6?
Yeah. Well, is that necessary? We know what number 6 is.
Just do it one more time, just going on what Elizabeth said. The motion would be to remain neutral on the application for 147 Conestoga Road, but if the zoning hearing board elects to grant the relief requested, the planning commission asks that the zoning hearing board consider 1, sidewalks on Doyle, 2, the number of curb cuts, 3, the driveway width, 4, meeting of land development criteria, or lot development criteria, and 5, consider neighbor comments.
I'm going to make it more confusing because Dallas is playing the Giants, so that's okay. Maybe what we should say, okay, and this is merely an opinion, that I don't think we should stay neutral. Maybe that's kind of where I am. I think maybe what we should say is we recommend these 5 points in order to make this agreeable to us. In other words, that's kind of what our job is. Our job is to make recommendations, all right, not to stay neutral. So what we're saying to them is, as it stands, we don't necessarily agree with what's going on, but we recommend you pass this, but with these criteria. You need these criteria to pass it. I think that's what we're saying.
Well, I think it's just semantics, actually, at this point.
Yeah, but we
it's-
don't
it's-
we don't all agree on some of these things, though. We want them to consider curb cuts, but we don't all agree that how the curb cut should be done,
Well,
because they need to
that's
think
zoning,
that
but we
through.
just know that curb cuts need to be done.
That's
We're
why
not
we should
saying
stay,
this is the
that's
curb
why
cut.
I think
That's
we
why we
should
should stay
remain neutral
neutral.
in this thing, because we're making our concerns known to them, to the zoning hearing board, and that's our job.
So one of the 5 points that we're talking about is neighbor input, and there is no neighbor input, so I have no idea
Right.
what the neighbors might say. And the mailing only went out today, so no one's here to talk about
That's
it.
exactly what I said. We can't.
Well, maybe an alternative would be, we have a couple straight-up approvals, and then we have a couple people who need more information. And maybe we can make a motion to say, there's a couple people who can't really make a recommendation. We could call it neutral, or that we need more information, and a couple people who just who would recommend a straight-up
bad, too.
approval.
There's too much time.
Well, we're not going to get any more information, because that's the time
Right.
of this is that it's going to go forward to the zoning hearing board. So we have our recommendations, okay? Everybody can agree that we have 5 recommendations. I really don't see the difference between being neutral with 5 recommendations and saying, well, we're not really too sure that you should act on it, but if you do act on it, then here's our 5 recommendations.
Well, I just think that, part of our job is to hear all sides, and we can't hear all sides right now. So how can I approve something that I can't hear
I
public
agree.
comment on?
I agree with you wholeheartedly.
But it's
That's
coming
why
back to us.
the
It
zoning
just-
hearing
just
board.
pass
has
it on.
got
It's
that
coming
goes
back
down,
to
and
us.
it will come back to
It's
us
coming
on
back to
those
us.
things for which we are here to do. And this is really an exercise, I think, and it's a good thing that we do it. But as I said before, the final analysis, it's the zoning hearing board that calls the shots on these things. And I think it's all well and good that we give them our recommendations, but those recommendations don't necessarily have to go with approval or disapproval, because that's not our brief. That's not what we're here to do. We're
Right,
here to make the
let's
recommendations.
Vote
and that's
on
what we're
what's on
doing.
the floor, the 5 points. Just,
Okay.
let's move on here.
I agree with you. So
Move
let's,
on.
let's, once again, we have a motion that's
Elizabeth, read your
outstanding.
motion again. Go through your thing.
No,
Say
I
how
think
you
we,
want to
I
say
think the motion's
I think
clear
she
on the
got it. She
record.
got the
Is it,
motion.
do you have the motion down? Okay. Let's have a
Sidewalks,
show-
curb
let's-
cuts, development criteria, driveway, neighborhood input.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right. Do we have to have a re-seconding of it? Does somebody want to second the
I'll
motion?
second it.
Okay, let's have a vote. All in favor of neutral with the recommendations, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Get it out of here. Move on.
All opposed? There's 1 opposed, 2 abstaining? Or in favor, well,
Well, yeah, but that means you're against this.
you're voting no then. Okay, so it's 5-3,
Okay, move on. It's passed. Let's move.
okay? So you need the identities of who voted for what? Okay, you got it down? All right. Now, next is
Take your
210
horse and go
North
home. We
Aberdeen
killed that one.
Associates.
And so the board knows too, what happens is on these whole notice things, we file the application. We, according to statute, we have to send the notices out 10 days, mail them 10 days before, and then 7 days before, give the township proof of mailing. The notices don't say anything about this hearing, this meeting here, because there's only select ones from zoning that come here if you need a land development or subdivision. That's why we're here. So the notices the neighbors get, even if they got them by some chance today, it wouldn't even mention this hearing. It would just mention the zoning hearing. So I just want to make you aware, it's not like the fact that we didn't send them out purposely so that they didn't get notice of this hearing. It was more they wouldn't get it anyway. Okay.
The next one also?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I am. Oh, sure, go ahead. Well, Christie is setting up. This is a proposal by Rockwell Development. Christie's a vice president of Rockwell. She lives probably, I don't even think a pitching wedge, less than a pitching wedge from the site. The actual sole principal is Greg Lingo of Rockwell, who lives on Lansdowne and Runnymede, right by the middle school in Wayne. So we have 2 local people proposing this. Actually, Rockwell purchased the old swim or the pool, American Pool site, which was in a state of disrepair. They're looking to redevelop it. Part of that redevelopment calls for an amendment to the C3 zoning code. I think everyone knows, and C3 is probably the most intensive zoning in the township. At one time, the code, again, going back to 1960 or 70, it changed. But prior to that time, residential was permitted in C3 zoning. So you'll see as you go under the bridge on North Aberdeen, the area that, it used the bridge, I don't know if it still says, it used to say now entering Little Chicago, not saying it anymore, but it's a combination of a commercial and residential area. What we're proposing here is basically to permit the residential use again in the C3 zoning district, and as a result, we when we were proposing this amendment. In Radnor, there's very limited areas of C3. You'll see the C3 in that, I guess it's kind of a beige color, where a lot of it's outlined in red there. That is the area south or north of the railroad tracks. The railroad tracks are right there, the Amtrak railroad tracks. On the other side of those tracks is what used to be the old Acme site, which is now a number of strip stores. That is C3 as well. The ordinance is written so that that area of C3 does not get the benefit of this amendment. The only area that gets the benefit of this amendment is the area that you see outlined in red. The other area of C3 in the township is where the car wash is at the intersection of Lancaster and Conestoga. That is zone C3. There was an area in Garrett Hill that was zone C3 prior to the amendment for the Garrett Hill zoning district. That area has now been rezoned from C3 to another area called the Garrett Hill, I think there it is, Garrett Hill, GHBC, I believe it is, or is it GHC there? There was one lot right there, that 834, that was right on Garrett and Conestoga, that was zone C3, but that now has been rezoned. Because it did come up last time as we were walking out, one of the Garrett Hill residents or Rosemont residents had mentioned to us that that lot is zone C3 and they want to make certain this development is not applicable to that. And we did go back and check, and it has been rezoned to this Garrett Hill CR zoning district, so it would not be applicable to that particular area. I'll turn this over to Christy, and she'll go through the slide presentation and show you what we're doing. You have the amendment in front of you. As I mentioned, there's certain limitations, such as it has to be 450 feet from an arterial. The only arterial, well, the Blue Route's an arterial, I guess, but Lancaster Avenue being the arterial that's affected here, 450 feet. So we're further, so that really just limits it to that area. Then it also has to already be adjacent to residential development. So that's where you see that red area there is the area that this is limited to. And one other thing that we did write in the ordinance, actually, because lot coverage in this area is obviously a big concern, we increased the lot coverage requirement if an entity wanted to take advantage of this amendment. Go ahead, Christy.
Thank you, Nick. Christy Flynn, as Nick said, and I am a resident. I live right over here, so I can see this property from my house every morning out the front door. We're talking about a piece that you might know as the former American Pool property. It is just north of the railroad underpass on North Aberdeen. Hopefully our color holds up here. There is existing, this is what it looks like. It's a stockade fence, and the inside that fence, I can attest, is a pretty substantial pile of trash that the previous owners really didn't ever believe in throwing things away. They really hold on to everything they had the chance. But we've cleared a bunch of stuff from the property, including pool chemicals and variety of that sort of thing. And then there's this beauty, this house that has been vacant for many years and was on fire about a year ago, or maybe even a little bit more. It's not great for the neighborhood as it sits. So with Rockwell, what we're proposing is to really acknowledge a couple of realities that are happening in the neighborhood. One, it's currently a mixed-use neighborhood already. And you can see from here that there are houses down the same side of the street. This is the rear of the property. And these are the houses across the street. So this property is really at a transition place between the more intense commercial that you might know, the Burkett property, the hardware store, and this residential neighborhood here. And so that's one piece of reality that we think is important to recognize. The other piece is that this property is not suitable for the commercial that used to be really reasonable on this particular location. There was a retail store adjacent. This is not a retail location. It's not what is in demand now for that sort of use, and it's not an office. It's not a good office use. There's not good access for big trucks because of the overpass and the small roads. So we'd like to just recognize that it's not great as a commercial use in this particular piece of this C3 area. So like I said, there's a variety of uses. There's those single families and twin homes, both down the street and across the street. This is the rear of the property, so from Cowan's Alley. This is across Cowan's Alley. That's the Burkett property where Land Rover parks at the moment. These are some other businesses that are run primarily off of Cowan's Alley. And then this is the east side of North Aberdeen. And that is the east side as well. And you can see there that property there is a mixed-use property. That's in R5, but again, on the same block where it's got retail that's vacant on the first floor and residences above. This is what we'd like to be able to build. This is built on a very similar site. We'd like to build homes that are in this sort of idea. So some attached product. We'd like to build townhomes here. We imagine that we'll have one driveway, 2 garages in the rear. The site slopes down from the street, so it is really conducive to this style of home where your main level has a front door that fronts onto North Aberdeen. You've got your bedroom level above that, probably a loft up on the 3rd floor for your office or a similar kind of use, and then your garage in what is essentially your basement but a walkout condition here. These are homes that we built in Haverford, actually adjacent to some other commercial uses in that particular location as well. So we could.
Where in Haverford is that?
This is on Buck Lane. One other important point that we would want to make is that the requirement for parking would be as required for the particular uses. So parking's a very serious concern in this neighborhood. Many people in the neighborhood park on the street, and we would propose that each of these homes would have access to their 2-car garages from the back. But in addition to that, for this plan that we're talking about, we are proposing that we would move the curb to widen the street and allow for this bump in for parallel parking along the street so that it can function a little bit better in that area. That's really the bulk of what we're talking about. We've tried to tailor this to add to the commercial. There are existing businesses that are successful here. We don't want to chase the commercial out of this location. The hardware store is super convenient for us to have there, and it is successful there. But as we go forward, there is this need to recognize the existing conditions. And you can see here that I sort of color-coded what all the uses are in this area. Anything that's purple is already mixed use. Anything that's red is already commercial, and anything that's blue is a residential use. So it's very much mixed now, and it would be appropriate to make this change, we think. We did have, I should also mention, a neighbor meeting and got feedback from many of the neighbors. And they had valid concerns and questions about how this might impact them and their property. But on the whole, it was overwhelmingly positive. Can I answer any questions?
Can you show me your site plan again?
Sure.
It was the one where you showed the houses on it? Yeah, that one.
Yep.
So the building that is 210 North Aberdeen, you're leaving that building, or I didn't understand that?
Yeah, that's an existing separate non-conforming lot that We would not propose to change the use there because it goes all the way through to Cowan. And if I put my planner hat on, I wouldn't really want to put residential onto Cowan.
That's not your property, is that,
This,
yeah.
we do own that
Oh,
as
okay.
well. Mhm. But it is a separate parcel.
What are your plans to clean that up?
If we would be successful in getting this zoning change and allowed us to develop the adjacent lot as residential, we would give it an exterior makeover to make it look nice and attractive so that we could have successful sales in there. If we were not successful in being able to build this residential proposal, we would likely expand that building, and we would use this parcel for some. We would have to figure out some other use for it at that point that would be compliant.
I'm just curious, the parcel that you're talking about, the
Yep.
long one, what's there right now?
It is it's the trash pile, really. It's the house that looks like this and the yard here. All of this yard. Behind this fence, there's a pretty substantial one-story garage or not garage, shed that's full of all the pool things you could think of, trash, old
So what are you planning to do with that?
trucks. This parcel?
Yeah.
We would demolish the existing structures, the house, and the house is salvageable. It's completely destroyed. And the shed would be demolished, and then we would build the townhomes, clean the trash. So the houses that would face onto the street, you'd be looking at the front of homes here.
Mr. Chairman? I have a question. You showed twins, but the ordinance is written more in terms of multifamily dwellings, and I wondered why.
They're townhomes. They're attached. They're all attached.
Then, Mr. Cornelia, you wouldn't have any objection to amending the ordinance to reflect that twins were permitted, but not necessarily apartment buildings?
Well, townhomes. The ordinance.
I'm sorry, townhomes, excuse me, I misspoke.
Yes.
Yeah, the way the ordinance, and this is the problem sometimes with drafting these amendments that we've run into before, is trying to fit it in the ordinance, to try to make it consistent with everything. And in the R5 zoning district, you're permitted, as we kind of just went over on the previous application, single-family dwellings, single-family semi-detached, which are twins, and two-family dwellings, duplexes. And then also, you're permitted multiple dwellings. And I think the way the code reads for multiple dwellings is they're apartments, they're townhomes, they're, kind of everything. So, Mary, I guess, the question is, or you were saying not to have which one were you trying to exclude? And we can always exclude something. I don't think in the ordinance itself.
Well, I guess my thought was if the developer wants to put in townhouses, the ordinance amendment doesn't necessarily have to go more dense than townhouses unless that's something the Planning Commission thinks is appropriate.
In other words, not include or kind of delete apartment houses from it.
Perhaps, yes.
I don't think we would have any, I don't think there's any apartment houses around this area, but I don't think we would have any problem with deleting that.
There are the mixed-use buildings that have they have business and apartments here. We're not seeking to build apartments. I'd be fine with changing apartments. Your ordinance doesn't have a separate definition for apartments and townhomes now, so it would be creating what would essentially be a separate, I think, house type, which, again, I'm fine with that. We're trying our best to keep this as simple as possible, to call to other sections of the ordinance. but we'd be fine with that restriction.
Where would you insert that, Nick? Where would you
Yeah,
insert
I
that?
think probably where it says use regulations in 280-55. We would probably, any use or accessory use permitted in the R5 residence district, except apartment, except an apartment house. We probably define an apartment house.
Yet, normally, we don't, you know, in zoning, we don't use the word apartment, we use like multifamily dwellings, but usually there's a distinction between townhouses and multifamily for obvious reasons. So maybe it's just a matter of tinkering. You're right, that's a perfect section to deal with it. It's just a matter of tinkering with that section so that it reflects it, if that's what the planning commission wants to do.
Mary, does this fall on something like a spot zoning situation? Is that proposed that per problem?
No,
with
I
this?
don't think it is.
That's why we do,
As townhomes, they have property lines between them, at party walls, right? Yeah.
and maybe that's the way to define it as townhomes. We're gonna have to put definition probably.
You know,
of a
single-family attached.
townhome. Yeah.
Single-family attached, there's a lot of regulations that are at our disposal for townhouses. It's not hard to put them in.
What other properties will be able to benefit from your proposed change?
Sure, so, go back up to this top here. There were a couple of qualifiers that go with that. They would have to be greater than 450 feet from the arterial. And then further, they would have to be directly across the street or adjacent to a residential district. So you can see the areas that are highlighted in red on the screen, and those would be the pieces that fit into those qualifications. So in terms of what is there now, the Pico, there's a Pico building that's down here on the corner. This is owned by the township. And then the other piece is that you would need 100 feet of width to be able to do the townhomes. Their lot would need to be 100 feet wide. So even some of these lots, what it would take would be assembly. Lots would have to be put together in order to be able to take advantage of the residential use criteria. So if these were assembled, for instance, they could be turned into, they are currently residential, but then they could be turned into some different residential potentially. And these would need assembly down here as well.
I'm just curious, I have no objection to this. I'm just curious why some of the lots would be excluded. Why wouldn't we just wrap a line around that whole area?
This is adjacent to the railroad tracks
Yeah.
here. So
Yeah.
it's not a situation where you'd be buffering from other residential areas. You'd be, if you wrap this line around here, you'd have properties that could, like for instance, this property here, would feel like a residential piece in the middle of a potentially commercial area. It's not, when we sort of first conceptualized this idea, the idea was that there would be a buffer that would be permitted between the residential and the more commercial uses. And so that's why we've been pursuing this idea of having one of the criteria being adjacent to the residential.
Yeah, and it kind of makes sense that for it to be adjacent to residential because you're just continuing that residential type use.
Also, if you drive down Pennsylvania Avenue, you get a sense of the commercial aspect of that area where the hardware store is. You don't even know where this place is until you hit Aberdeen. Even if you're looking at a map, I was looking at stuff before I got to Aberdeen, thinking this must be these addresses, and they weren't. And then when I turned on Aberdeen, it became extremely residential, a residential feel with some eyesore buildings mixed in there. So it's not, this is not, this area that they're talking about doesn't feel commercial, except for the pool place. It feels like a neighborhood that went awry. That end of the neighborhood, something happened, it's derelict, it's a mess.
No,
And a lot of neighbors are looking at this.
So, well, that's kind of my point, is wouldn't we extend this flexibility to everyone in that area to be able to build residential or commercial?
Well, it's already happening on Aberdeen. I mean, there are some things we've okayed up toward there.
No, I understand that, but there's a big property that's, I think, right in the middle of these that, you're saying that? Pardon?
Market, yeah,
I mean, that's
So
where-
you're saying that lot
would not,
cannot be used?
it would not, under this.
It'd
ordinance.
it used to be a coal yard, among other things. So I guess there's some,
Range Rover Parks.
there's where Range Rover parks their cars over there now, but I think cleaning the place up might
Yeah, I
be
don't know if
somewhat
they
daunting.
cleaned- I don't know if it's ever been cleaned up. I know there was environmental issues at one point. I don't know if it's ever been taken care of or not.
One of the questions that.
I guess you kind of condemn it to being this, right? I
Again,
mean, if they had flexibility to do the same uses as adjacent properties, wouldn't it be greater
again,
possibility it might get
right.
developed?
it doesn't affect us, but.
No,
we're
I'm just
trying to-
curious. I mean, it's
yeah.
kind of a spot.
Yeah, during our
And-
discussions with everyone, it was some thought to limit what we can do rather than expand it. So that's kind of why we came
So
up.
let me
with
just be
this
clear,
alternative.
what is circled, or not circled, what's outlined in red?
That's the properties that could
Could be,
possibly
but-
develop, but again, you have to comply with your lot width and things of that nature.
We're only concerned now with the lots that are on the right-hand side going up North Aberdeen.
No, all these lots would, if this ordinance were approved, all those lots in red could be developed in
Okay.
accordance with this if they met the certain requirements for lot area, lot width,
Okay.
and things of that nature. And as Christie said, many of them are too small for that. They would have to be combined in order to be able to do that.
We are concerned with those particular lots, but understanding that making zoning changes like this can have do have consequences for other properties. We wanted to outline exactly which other properties would be subject to what we've proposed now. So you are more concerned with those probably than we are. We're interested in
Here's a
what we're working on.
question for
How
you.
did you choose these properties again? What is the criteria?
The criteria is you're 450 feet
Yeah.
from an arterial, and you have to be adjacent to a residential zoning code. R5, R4, as you'll see, all those areas are adjacent to either R5 or R4 zoning.
To the extent that you said that there's trash dump, chemicals, what about the chemicals? Are there environmental issues?
Yeah,
Are
well,
there-
actually, we've already spent a substantial amount of money removing every chemical out of the property. After the fire, that was one of the things the township required of us, was to remove, it was actually prior to our acquisition of the property, but we have removed every single thing, including an unmarked canister that they brought in, like a thing that looked like a submarine to take out. So it's cleared of all chemicals at this point. And then there is some historic fill on the property that will take some environmental work if we pursue a residential development.
And as far as taking the chemicals away, you took them off the surface, but have they,
When I say we took, there were buckets
Mhm.
and drums, there were huge tanks of chlorine. Chlorine's a gas, but the equivalent that they use for the pool maintenance. Our environmental consultant has reviewed the site, and fortunately for us, most of the chemicals used in the pool business are not persistent. So they essentially evaporate themselves with some time. So the concern that is remaining is some historic fill that has some heavy metals in it that we have not made any change to, but it's just stationary. There's no concern for anyone else in the neighborhood. You just really shouldn't go and eat the dirt on the site.
We take excuse me, I'm sorry. I think we should have some public comment at this point. Any public comment?
Hello, my name is Dominic Demitis. I live at 206 Poplar Avenue. I own 214 North Aberdeen, 223, and 225 Plant Avenue. The proposal they have, I actually like. My big concern is parking. The homes they put up on the corner of Willow and Plant are 4 townhomes. And if you make that turn and you go down Plant Avenue, you can you're allowed to park along that new sidewalk. And with the telephone pole across the street, it gets bottlenecked down into 1 lane. They propose to widen the street and have have parallel parking. I would like to see that be part of the development process, is that anything that's going to be developed, if it's applicable, they would need to do something along that lines for the roads. You got to remember, I don't know if the Wawa's still going in down the street or not, but you get traffic backed all the way up to the bridge. That is the main bridge. That's the tallest bridge in Wayne. So you get a lot of traffic and trucks going to the colleges and in that area. So their proposal is great. It keeps that road open. The other thing I have is that if you're going to allow this, there needs to be some sort of additional off-street parking. I think that you're putting in, right now they're proposing a total of, it's 6 homes now, and you have the 4 homes on the corner of Willow and Plant. That's 10 homes on pretty small parcels. And if you continue to acquire properties and continue putting this many homes in there, that's going to be a lot of street parking people are going to be looking for. So having off-street parking, I think, is something to consider. I don't know if they can work that in or if that's a possibility, but that's something to consider. So that's basically my my stance and how I feel about it. Thank you.
Any other public, I'm sorry.
Just one thing to Claire, and Dom knows, Rockwell did not develop the 4 units that are on Plant and Willow that he referenced. That was another developer.
That's those, it's where the haunted house used to be or whatever it was called.
Exactly.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, you saw that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That development was before this board. Well, I think it was 4 townhomes.
Where is that on the, on one of your,
Sure, one second.
as soon as they get back in operation there?
It's just here on the corner. This is Willow that runs down,
Right.
makes the turn here, and it's this property here, right there. So,
Is it like 22 or 23, is it? Okay.
yeah, I think it's labeled 22. It's hard to read the numbers on the zoning map there. But
Okay, I see
it's
where
on
I-
the corner of Plant and Willow.
Yes.
And Aberdeen, it's sort of this 3-way, this is Aberdeen coming here, and
Right.
then you would turn left down Plant, and it would be on the right-hand side there. But we did not develop those pieces. It's just another example of residential development. That was previously a residential use that I understand. Again, I'm talking just because I'm a neighbor and I know the sort of rumors, but they got a residential permission in C3 because of their historic residential, sort of a continuation of the non-conforming use. But
The townhouses that you're proposing, do they have parking in the back?
yes, so I would propose that we would have the 2-car parking under the homes, in the garages. And then, as I had mentioned, we were proposing to move the curb line into the site to allow for on-street, but additional parking.
So does the garage in the back allow parking in the garage as well as on some kind of little driveway?
The driveway's probably not deep enough for a head-in parking, but it's likely deep enough for a parallel parking space behind the garage as well. We've used that sort of style in other communities, and it's been successful there.
So so-called on-street parking, that would be for the residents of these, or for whose use?
Would be for guests or the neighborhood. You know, at the moment, there are people that park on North Aberdeen parallel parking, and it creates a yield condition where cars that need to pass each other have to wait for the other to go by. So this would create some designated spots. There's no on-street parking directly in front of the property because there's it's all a curb cut. There's no parking permitted there. But so this would add on-street, but off the travel lane parking.
Yeah, there is actually some on-street parking, I believe, on North Aberdeen, but not in front of your site.
Correct.
You don't own all the properties outlined in red, right?
No.
Okay, just a portion of them.
Correct.
Yeah, in the code, we're not changing the code as to the required number of parking spaces that you need. You know, for every single home, every single dwelling needs 2 parking spaces, and that is what's being provided.
Well, one of the problems there is when you're coming up Pennsylvania Avenue towards North Aberdeen and you want to make a left turn, I mean, it's already a problem. I mean, you have to look and see, you can't see what's coming under the train tunnel, overpass. And then if there's a car parked any place near that curb, it's a shooting gallery trying to get out of there sometimes, especially at night or even daytime, really.
Yeah, again, we're further up the street, but I know exactly what you're talking about, because when you go out there and you have to, you know, squeak out and keep looking to your left to make certain nothing's coming. Fortunately, it's you know, it's a windy road and narrow road, so people don't go that fast, but.
No, I'm trying to figure out the logic of why I mean, I understand the criteria you use to make the selection, but why would we leave those other properties out? Why wouldn't those owners have that same flexibility to build residential if they'd like? I mean,
totally, we don't oppose it.
Okay,
It was just-
I mean, I think,
Yeah,
I mean, as a
it was-
planning group, that's probably something we should be talking about, is what do we think of that area and its possibility that it's all mixed-use property.
And certainly one thing you can do is I guess the concern is to permit all of it is what type of impact would it have. One idea which has been advanced on other projects is permit this limited use, see how it works out, and then we can always expand it at a later time by an amendment if the township so desires.
There's nothing about your proposal that would affect that in the future. I mean, let's say that this goes well and somebody wants to undertake cleaning up Burkhardt Brothers, for example.
Right.
I mean, that would be a huge area for
Right.
residential development. I mean, the other places like the hardware store and whatnot could be grandfathered. I mean, I mean, that can all be done, and I don't think that your proposal is some sort of a roadblock to that.
And all you would have to take out of the proposal, the amendment, is that it has to be adjacent to an R5 or other residentially zoned district. That's the only thing that would have to be removed, and you would have that whole area that is to the north of the tracks. It would still not include the area to the south of the tracks, but it would include the area to the north of the tracks.
But the only thing south of the tracks is Lament's place, but that's up at track level.
Yeah, the veterinarian and the strip stores there at the old Acme site.
Right. Okay. I think we have, is there more public comment? Yeah, let the gentleman come forward.
Hi, thank you for your time. I'm Peter Trissini. My family owns the property at 216 North Aberdeen, and we run a business out of that location as well. We also very much in favor of this development. Minor concerns. The original proposal called for a reduction in the amount of impervious surface. Is that still on the table?
Yep.
Okay. And according to what they originally said was that this would not affect the zoning of the properties as they currently stand only if they're redeveloped as residential, is that correct?
Yeah, so we would.
Okay, yeah, you would still have the opportunity to either redevelop it as commercial or residential.
Okay.
You know, and this would be applicable if you decide to develop as residential. And you still wouldn't be giving up the right to develop as a commercial.
The original reduction that was called for was from 65 to 60, is that still?
Yes, it is. It's in the ordinance packet
65 to 60 what?
to 60%. It is 65% now. If they were going to do this type of residential development, be reduced to 60%
So
impervious.
would this in fact then create a new zoning district in some way, shape, or form? Or would this just be, I mean, how would you differentiate between the C3 that's existing and this new mixed-use
Yeah,
C3?
it's an amendment to the C3. So the C3 still exists, it's not being changed. This is being added to the C3 as an
Okay.
additional,
So it's just an amendment?
Right.
Just
Okay.
an additional use that you would have in addition to all the other stuff
Right.
you already have.
Yeah, I mean, I get, in reality, that kind of already exists, does it not? I mean,
well, it's non-conforming, so what you have now is non-conforming. If someone wanted to do it, they couldn't do it legally without going to the zoning hearing board and getting some sort of relief. So if you wanted to put residential in, you couldn't do it technically right
even though
now.
there is already residential
Yes.
on that?
Yes.
Makes sense.
Now, if you were residential, perhaps you would be able to do it, it'd be a little bit easier, but, you know,
Right, well, that's what I'm saying. On that property, there is a home and there is a business. And so you could not, you
You're
could
not
only
conforming.
redevelop it as a business?
Correct.
Currently? Not
Currently.
a residence?
correct.
Okay.
You would have to go to the zoning board and ask for some sort of relief, a variance or special exception or something of that nature.
Did they just do that?
Now, what happened, yeah, Dom, what happened there, remember, that was four residential units. And they just developed it into 4 residential units again. So it was a nonconformity. And they did have to go to the zoning hearing board to get approval on that. But it was already 4 residential units, and they built 4 new townhomes because it was the old Halloween place.
Will C3 remain 65% impervious?
Yes,
Can you,
Only
can
if
you
you're-
go up to the mic, please?
yeah. Dom asked, will C3 remain 65% impervious? And the answer is yes. Only if you were going to do this residential development would you be reduced to 60%. So you're not losing everything. And Dom, I don't know if you remember, years and years ago, they wanted to take away this C3 zoning district there, and the neighbors really fought it, and it kind of went by the wayside.
I think that answers my questions pretty well.
Okay, thank you. Dom, do you have any other questions?
I think one of the reasons why they marked that out in red is, like I said earlier, you know, we have 2 parcels of property, one on the corner of Willow and Plant. There's 4 homes there, 6 proposed. These are pretty small parcels and quite a few homes going in them. If you were to take that entire area and allow this type of construction to be built, you would have a couple hundred homes put in there. I mean, it'd be a lot of homes. So this is one of the reasons why I think they have it set up the way they do. I don't, you know, I think you kind of knocked me out on Plant Avenue, it looks like. But you can't develop the entire area with this type of density. It's going to be overwhelming.
The reason why those properties, because they're the only ones that touch residential properties.
Pardon?
The reason why it's just those red properties is because they're the only ones that touch residential properties. That's
Right.
that's what the thing is. It's-
Right, right.
So the other ones
There was a
don't
comment-
qualify,
There was a comment, why not do the entire area?
because they don't qualify.
Right, but I'm just saying, I didn't want to see the entire area.
Yeah.
I mean,
Then you'd have to rezone it, they would rezone it out of C3.
Right.
Basically.
Right.
You know, and all they're doing now is just asking for, you know, they're adding another line in the ordinance that says, if it touches, you can do this.
Right, and
But
and
only if
agree
it
with their
touches.
proposal.
Right.
It was a comment you had made that, why not do the entire thing, and why not include Burkett's, and I just think it would be way overdeveloped. Thank you.
Any further questions by any members of the commission? Comments?
I think-
Suggestions?
I think potentially, since it's such a small area of the township, that we could put in a parking requirement, off-street parking requirement. Is that possible in this area? To require a certain number of spots?
Well, it wouldn't be the area, it would be connected with the use.
Okay.
So, yeah, that would be appropriate, but what were you thinking of?
At
Three
least
call for
two
parking, Nick.
off-street parking?
C3 is based on the parking, what was it, 10-something of the code, which if it's retail, it's, you take 80% of your gross floor area and then divide it by 200, and then you have to have one for every 2 employees. So technically, the hardware store is supposed to have, one per every 2 employees. Is probably non-conforming, I would
So
suspect.
basically, you would have to put a line in that parking is the same parking as in R5 or one of the other ones. So you have
Which
to
it
put-
is.
Yeah, you have to, is that in there?
It's in there. Basically, it doesn't change. The parking code, I think it's 10, each zoning district doesn't have their own parking. It's all caught in 103. And 103 says what use you have and what parking requirement you're required to have. For example, it says dwellings, 2 spaces per dwelling unit. Dormitory, 1 space per 3 residents. Tourist house, hotel, motel, theater, auditorium. Goes down to retail stores, as I mentioned, office buildings, motor vehicle service stations, things of that nature.
So there is a parking requirement based
Yes.
on residential.
There is a parking requirement based
Is that
on
what you're worried
residential.
about?
Separately in the zoning code under section 103.
I'm just wondering specifically for this area, because it is so tight, is it enough? Is 2 enough?
Well, that's,
And I don't know if we can change that.
Sorry.
No.
Back to why aren't you just asking for a variance on your property?
we would have to get a use variance,
Yeah.
which generally is one of the most difficult variances to get. You would, technically, you have to show that you cannot use the property for any permitted purpose. And in C3, basically, everything's permitted except for residential.
Yeah.
You can have a restaurant, you can have an office building, you can have a retail store, you can have a gas station, you can have pretty much anything except for residential. And that's why this is a mixed,
It's more.
everyone's going mixed now. The whole big thing is, let's do mixed development.
No,
downtown
that's
Maine,
why that's why it kind of puzzles me why we would leave those properties in the center out. Aren't you making it so they would never develop? You're always going to have that eyesore there?
They would have to come back to the
Like, why-
township and ask that this ordinance
Would
be,
I mean, they can continue to do what they do now,
Yes.
right? So if they were included in this now, would that be kind of a more comprehensive plan of that area? Then,
something to be said about it.
yeah, I find it
Yeah, again,
difficult to look at
yeah.
this plan and try to, I mean, I know the criteria used, of course, but I'm not sure where that criteria came
One of the
from.
things I think we have to think about, Steve, is that they're coming in and just talking about the area they're talking about. And that's why I asked Nick the question, and if our council wants to contradict him, feel free to do so, but this planned amendment doesn't in any way prevent these other areas that are presently in C3 from being rezoned commercial, or if you wanted to go and redo the entire area, as maybe rezone the entire area, or put some sort of an overlay there, I mean, that could be done, but it has to be, somebody has to want to do it. It's not going to,
They're asking to do this to property they don't own. So how, on what basis are they doing it?
They're trying to make the use available in similarly situated parcels. There's two things that come to mind when you raise that issue. One is that most municipalities consider their commercial districts very, very desirable because that's where tax revenue comes from. And so for every residential piece of ground, generally it costs the township 6% more than the taxes generated by that piece of ground to provide the services necessary for the the residential people that live there 24/7. So rezoning commercial property is not something municipalities usually look favorably on. And this isn't a rezoning, it's adding an additional use. But it has the potential of eliminating the commercial development of the property. Second, you have residents that are saying that there are most likely going to be parking issues, and the more lots in that area that are allowed to have this particular use, the more problems you're going to have with the parking. So I
Just
would.
said we have off-street parking requirements, right?
And you may be 100% right, but I don't think we know that. And to determine whether or not you should make a residential use available in a commercial district on a widespread basis, I think you'd want to do a little bit more research and know a little bit more what you're talking about. So he's offering this on a limited basis, and I think my recommendation would be, if you think it's a good idea, start on a limited basis and then work from there. Exactly what Mr. Lord was saying.
John, can I make a motion?
Yes.
I move that we pass on to the commissioners our recommendation to adopt the ordinance as submitted on a limited basis, and changing Article 8, C3, Service Commission, add residential use in accordance with the stipulations set in the amendment.
Did we want to take apartments out? Yes.
Yes. Does he talk about apartments? I thought they took the apartments out, didn't they, Mary? Yeah.
We'll have to work
Yeah,
on language.
right.
So with the understanding, that the language will be cleaned up to exclude multifamily homes?
Exclude apartments.
Apartment.
Well, we'll say we'll
However you wanna say
redefine
it, Mary.
multifamily dwelling to not include townhouse units. We'll handle the redrafting, yes.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So that's, is that unanimous, or?
Yes.
Okay.
It'll be back.
I think it looks, it appears that the proposed amendment, the motion has been carried unanimously.
Thank you for your time tonight.
You're welcome. Okay, so now we're down to the lighting ordinance discussion. Or are we going to review the documents, the information that you've given us, and take this up at our next meeting? Or
Yeah,
Mary,
it just.
you want to go through this?
No, just by way of a quick 30-second introduction, Steve and I have been working on this. In front of you, what the structure that we're leaning toward at this point is, including a general lighting section in the zoning ordinance, and then carving out specific uses where the planning commission thinks they're needed, and we put some specific use, one specific use of outdoor athletic facilities. And at this point, we're going through Matt's list of all the other places in the code where lighting is mentioned, and determining how best to handle them, whether to bring it into the general section, or whether to amend or to make it consistent. But in working on this, Steve and I came up with a list of questions that we're going to bring to you, and it's not fair to give you the list tonight and ask you to answer the questions tonight. But if you could, between now and the December meeting, take a look at the draft of the ordinance, which is rough, and then also consider the questions that are on this list, we would appreciate it.
And I might add, the vast majority of that is all our solicitor. I just added a couple things for your attention, but.
He wants me to take the hit when you hate it, so.
I'm giving Mary the credit now. When you hate it, you can say it was Norsini. That's no problem at all. That's my job. That's why I'm here.
Okay. Well, there's no public comment. We took care of that. Any old business? Well, there is one thing I'd like to mention. I was talking to Skip a little bit earlier. He told me, now I don't know if we can keep him on the commission. We'd certainly like to have that happen. But he told me that this might be his last meeting because he's not going to be here in December. Is this correct? Or are you going to stay around with us?
You know, I've had a great time the last almost 10 years, and I've learned a lot, and I learned that I have a lot more to learn than I did. It's a real pleasure to be with you all. I don't see how I can stay on under the current regulations, but I would if you needed somebody for a couple of months.
I think that'd be a great idea. I mean, you picked up all this knowledge. I know when I joined the commission, I really leaned on you an awful lot to help me get acclimated and feel my way along. And you've been a great contributor to the work of this commission. So, first, congratulations and thanks. But if you could stay around, that'd even be better.
I'll wait to hear from the powers that be.
Yeah, we'll pass that on to the solicitor. It is by ordinance. I do want to thank Mr. Kunditz, not just the Planning Commission, but he's involved in so much in this township, and he has been and still is in other factors. He's, his civic duty and his civic mindedness is unsurpassed. He does a great job. I do have one thing for the commission. So by the end of this year, we will be starting, actually, Jennifer DeStefano does all this. She schedules our meetings out for next year. And the one question that usually comes up, and I just want to toss it to you folks, do you want to continue to meet at 7 p.m. or would you wish to meet at 6:30 p.m.? That's your call. So 5:30 it is? That's fantastic. Thank you so much. It's greatly appreciated. No, we'll keep that at that for next year. Thank you.
Can I just say one thing too? The past 3 weeks, I did go to the planning class that was offered generously by the township. Thank you. And they did talk about the report that's required once a year. And so I don't know if we've had that discussion. And you did. I may be volunteering for something I later regret. But they did go over what should be included in it. So if there is help needed to pull that together, it didn't sound too difficult.
I think that'd be great. Yeah.
Based on that class.
There was a stunning silence when I brought it up.
Did they give you a form? I can send you a sample of what some other planning commissions do.
That would be really helpful.
Sure.
They were really straightforward about just listing the variety and the number of different things that came before the board. It seemed pretty straightforward. But if nobody else volunteered, I would offer it up.
And staff will help you as much as you need, and it'd be great to get ahead of the curve this year. Thank you. And thanks for Mr. Lord for bringing that up last year.
Any other business? Well, then I think we're adjourned. Not yet. Who would like to be on that committee?
You have to pick a vice chair.
So for the record, we have Elizabeth. Okay, and Charlie, and we need one more. Megan, okay, thank you. Okay, Elizabeth, Charlie, and Megan are on the committee. All right, well done.